this practice is a microcosm that's also a macrocosm, because it's more intense, of that same process of just sitting still while everything changes, and trying to bear the intensity of that, bear the heart's contraction and longing and resistance towards all of that change, to bear the enamoredness and the loss of that, the simply the changeability of everything. How powerful and simple that is, because we're trying to simply bear the truth. It's again, I'll say this often, it's like the thing that I trust so much about this practice is that it's not trying to control anything, it's not trying to make anything happen. It's simply stretching the heart over and over and building up the capacity to simply be with the truth, with reality as it is, as it's unfolding, as it's changing moment by moment. How pure actually a endeavor that is, how simple, and how incredibly hard. Just like it's so amazing how challenging it is, even if things aren't that hard, right? Like, I mean, I think that, folks who have been sitting for a long time, gone to a lot of retreats, you're familiar with like how ridiculous some of your complaining may sound as a yogi internally. But for folks who aren't as familiar with it, it's like when you really get how like nobody would understand a lot of the challenges that you're going through if you were trying to describe it. It's like, how was your day? Like, what did you do? What happened to you? It's like, well, nothing really. You sat, you walked, you made some food, you cleaned up, maybe did a chore, you sat a couple Zoom sessions. There was like nothing dramatically volatile in anything, or most anything that's going to happen to most people during our time together. And yet, um, the volatility internally, the struggle, the dynamics, the intensity, the wildness, and the sense of up and down and evaluation of that, is so powerful, so profound. It's very unique to the experience of being a yogi. It is the sort of foundational impulse that the Buddha had, right? Was this understanding of dukkha, this understanding of the hardship of the undependability, the changeability of everything, and wanting to find a solution, wanting to find an answer, wanting to find a way to liberation from the suffering that's generated through this changeability. And so really he tuned into this, these three qualities of reality, of nature, um, that in some ways are really the same quality, but sort of look at that through different lens. That anicca, dukkha, anatta. Anicca, the truth of impermanence, right? That everything is subject to change, dependent upon conditions. All conditioned phenomena arise and pass, change, when those conditions that brought them into being change. Dukkha is the hardship that comes from this undependability, right? That we're joined with unpleasant phenomena out of our control. We're separated from the pleasant phenomena outside of our control, and things are not always the way we want them to be, right? We want things to be different than they are. This quality of dukkha, often translated as suffering, but really it's like this undependability. Michelle will sometimes say the vulnerability of our hearts, right? The truth of that vulnerability. And then anatta, the fact that these these other truths are just as true for ourselves, right? That if you look at our own body, if you as we are, and we observe the mind, we observe all the phenomena we can observe, that everything we can observe, including the mind that's observing, is also totally impermanent, also totally subject to change. It arises, certain qualities of mind arise because of the conditions. When those conditions change, other qualities of mind arise, or those qualities pass away. So that actually there's a corelessness to ourselves. Either there isn't even a sense of stability in me-ness, right? Because the me is also just as equally changeable as anything else. Very powerful, the reality of all of these phenomena that we come into a relationship with as we just try to sit here with them. All of these things become evident on their own over time. There's not a lot we need to do to start to see that everything's changing, that everything is undependable, that things are not as we want them to be much of the time, or that when they are, we cling to them and we suffer when they change. And in this way, the practice, it makes us, the language is always imperfect, but it makes us stronger on one hand. It makes us that sense of a resiliency, of more resilient to the fact of changeability, right? That we actually see that our strength, our capacity, our sense of connection to clarity is not threatened by the unchangeability, by the changeability of things, right? By the movement and the um, undependable nature of things. It also makes us softer, more tender. There's a understanding that can come of just how hard it is to be a human being, how hard it is to be a being of any kind, to be thrust into a situation where so much is unknown and so much is undependable and out of our control. There's a tenderness that can ultimately arise of compassion, of sympathy, of appreciating how hard it is for ourselves, how hard it is for everyone. And that comes also out of understanding that the ways in which we are so deeply trained to defend against anicca, dukkha, anatta, right? The undependability, the changeability, the ways where we've trained, the ways our minds are conditioned to defend against them are things that are very painful ultimately, right? So these things called greed, hatred, and delusion that we are referred to in this tradition, of course, so much as like the biggest problem, right? That these are the things we're trying to overcome. These are the qualities of heart and mind that are what cause us suffering and cause suffering for so many. And of course, there is a truth to that. There is a way that we long to be free from the clenching of the heart around phenomena against or holding on. But through practice, that that softening, right? That gentleness, that clear-eyed, heartfelt curiosity that we start to relate to the heart with, relate to the mind, relate to the body with, also really helps us see that these tendencies are habits, they're defenses, right? The mind craves, the mind clings to phenomena because it longs for that security, right? It wants pleasurable experience to last, right? It's not wicked because of that. It's like it understands that things are impermanent and it tries to cling on to that which is pleasant, right? It's trying to create a sense of sort of stability around pleasant experience. And the same is true for aversion. It's like the opposite side of the same coin, ultimately the same practice, if you can call it that, right? It's the againstness, it's the protection, the dislike, the hardening against, the resistance against that which is changing, that which is unpleasant, right? That over which we have no control. And then delusion very similarly. It's like a way of like things are moving so quickly, as you can see in your practice. It's like the mind, the body, all these interactions, this ping pong machine that's just crazy. It's just the wildness of this wilderness is phenomenal. And the mind has not yet trained fully enough to be able to be with each moment of it very clearly. And so the mind inclines toward delusion also as a protection, as a way of creating stability. The biggest delusion we talk about is the sense of self, right? The sense of me-ness and my-ness. And on one hand, we think, oh, I have to get over this, and I have to be selfless, and I shouldn't be identified, and I shouldn't. And it's like, it's like we're missing the tenderness. We're missing that quality of like, oh God, this is the only way the heart knows how to protect itself, is by trying to create some platform of identity, some sense of stability in all of this flux and all this fluctuation. And we give ourselves a hard time for it. We give one another a hard time for it, including for our greed, our hatred, our anger, our aversion, our craving. It's like we judge it internally and externally. And it's one thing to recognize unskillful behavior and behavior that harms ourselves or others, of course. We do want to be as careful as we can, and we do want to protect one another, protect our society from behavior that is so violent or so greedy, or that creates so much disruption or inequality or suffering. And when we look at it in ourselves, can we appreciate that it's coming out of fear? It's coming out of simply a lack of training, right? That it actually isn't personal. That beings from time immemorial, right, as far back as we can consider, have been scrambling to survive, right, to run from that which is a threat, to cling on to and attach to what is going to feed us, to nourish us, to save us, to propagate. It's like these are very deep patterns. And it's like, might take a little while to untangle these. Might take a little bit of patience, a little bit of compassion, a little bit of appreciation of what we're up against, and that these things have protected us. They have saved our lives for sure in this lifetime and throughout eternity. And yet we also start to become sensitive to the dukkha, the pain of them, the lack of relationship with reality that we are in, right? That it's like, oh, we're threatened by the subtlest change. We're threatened by, it's like, oh, the sense of insecurity and the sense of contractedness and the deepening of the grooves of addiction or of hatred. We see that they're toxic for ourselves. We want to be free from them. We see that they're toxic to our relationships, to the world around us. So there's a good impulse to want to be free from them. But to understand this practice is all about insight, right? Insight meditation. So it is freedom through understanding, freedom through that tender, delicate, compassionate, caring, witnessing, genuine interest with the patterns of the heart and mind. As frustrating or challenging or dull or whatever as they might be, it requires both this tenderness and this dedication. And for all of us, whether this is our first retreat or 50th, or 150th, we're still, my understanding, of course, I haven't checked in with everyone yet this retreat, but my understanding is that we are still, to some degree, hoping we can control things to be the way that we want them to be. that we all, and that we're even using our practice to think that that will come of that the practice will help us make ourselves be the people we want to be, have the body be the way we want it to be, have things be the way we want them to be. And unfortunately, that the practice just is not designed for that. It really is still ultimately designed for us to develop more and more humility, humility beyond conception, really, right? And ease with acceptance of the truth of things, acceptance, including of how we wish things were different, and how much is out of our control. More and more gracefulness with the nature of reality, and even gracefulness with our resistance to it. I've been hearing a little bit recently about how many young people on our island here are having a really hard time right now. And of course, the news is so focused on the world of adults and conflicts and the suffering and dukkha of adult realities, that the young people don't always bubble up to the surface and what they're going through, and I know that it's more than just here. It's around the world, right? In every country, everywhere, we know that, of course, it's hard to be a being. It's hard to be a young being. There's even in quote unquote normal times, there's a lot of suffering, immeasurable suffering in our world. But there is something about this lockdown and just COVID, where from infants to high school, it's like there's just the lack of social interaction, the being stuck in in homes, the um, just so many levels of anxiety and depression and really, really hard things. Um, and how limited, of course, like in many places, the resources are for them, the sort of professional resources for mental health for young people and teenagers. And it's just really had me thinking about how we care about young people and children and babies. And um, I had I couldn't be with you this morning. I have a weekly radio show I have here. Since I've been home, I got a radio program on our local um, radio station. And so it's a couple hours on Sunday, and I couldn't just not show up. So I did a show this week of all lullabies, because I just have been so feeling of like how important it is for children, babies and kids, and like to feel that sense and to hear it, right? The sense of receiving these tender offerings, these qualities of heart, of care, that are soothing, that are reassuring, that are inspiring, that are relaxing, but also that don't. Many nursery rhymes and lullabies, if you listen to them, as I have been over the last days, they don't really evade the truth either. A lot of them, some are more fantastical, but a lot of them have elements of the dukkha of childhood or of adulthood or of the world outside of the child's immediate concerns. And it's very powerful to hear the ways in which uh, even a heavy truth, right, a kind of serious and painful truth about dukkha, can be offered with love in a way that actually is more integrated, right? And that the child can receive and integrate and um, appreciate and learn, right? Because these songs are also about teaching, learning about the ways of the world, but in the space of care and the space of reassurance and the space of tenderness, um, and how powerful that is, and how really we all need that, right? It isn't just the little kids that need that. And you know If we had nursery rhymes sung to us as children, we were very fortunate. If we didn't, it's like we know that pain, that longing. Either way, as adults, we still need that reassurance, that soothing, that tenderness, right? And it doesn't have to be distant from the truth. It doesn't have to be dishonest to be reassuring, to be soothing, to be caring, right? We need these lullabies. And that is a huge part of this practice is the loving kindness practice, right? The um, compassion, the appreciative joy. Those three, especially the heart practices, balanced with the equanimity practice and the equanimity of our vipassana practice, the clear seeing, the truth, the um, the more cool quality of heart that comes from acceptance of the truth is only possible when it's also in a vehicle that's balanced with tenderness and care and kindness and appreciation, right? That actually the love is the vehicle by which the mind stays, the heart stays buoyant enough to actually be able to accept the truth of the way things are, accept the vulnerability of our position, right? Of birth, old age, sickness, and death, of loss, of gain, of uh, praise and blame, of these vicissitudes of life. It doesn't change that, it doesn't deny that, but we need that reassurance, that care, that tenderness, that affection, that sense of um, companionship. And within this practice, we learn to give it to ourselves, right? Of course, we try to generate as much as we can for other people. We appreciate when other people offer us their kindness and care, and we aspire to live in a culture and community where that is more of the baseline. Um, but ultimately, the undependability of all these other factors comes into play. And we recognize that need to be able to develop and sustain a connection of caring for ourselves, for this body, for this mind, for these worries, for these hopes and dreams, for our aspirations for ourselves, for our insecurities. All of these things, as much as they need to be seen clearly, they need to be seen kindly, gently, tenderly. Without them, there's a harshness to the truth of the way things are, right? There's a bitterness that can start to develop in terms of that uh, relationship to reality. And it's not what we're trying to cultivate. It's not that cold detachment is not what we're trying to cultivate. There is a coolness, an acceptance, a relief of stopping struggling with reality, with the way things are, with the nature of phenomena. But that comes hand in hand with the deepening ability to care for every single phenomena that arises and passes as well. There are, of course, a number of methods that I'm sure most of you are familiar with in terms of how do we find a connection to this caring quality and how do we sustain it and how do we cultivate it over time. Um, we've offered some. Steve had some recorded instructions yesterday. I had some recorded instructions today, and we've tried to weave it in throughout little bits, and we'll continue to as well. You can see the classic methodology from our tradition is not actually one that the Buddha came up with himself, but kind of developed over years afterwards as different yogis and monks and nuns would practice and found a sort of approach that seemed to kind of hit all the bases around it. And so you'll see with whether it's the metta, the four Brahma Viharas, right? These four divine abodes, these qualities of heart that are the sort of pinnacles of the spiritual life, and really also balance each other, fine tune one another, refine one another, are metta, loving kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, appreciative joy, and upekkha, equanimity. You'll see they're all in that chant that we chant in the afternoon. They're all included in there one way or the other, even if metta is a sort of overarching offering. But that sense of loving kindness, of just that pure caring and well wishing for beings, for ourselves, for others, for all beings. Compassion is that flavor of caring, kind of oriented toward the pain in the world, the pain in our lives. Mudita comes out of that sense of appreciation for the joy in our lives, appreciation for the joy in other people's lives. And upekkha, that acceptance of the truth of things, the nature of reality being dependent upon conditions, our ownership of action, to understand that if our actions are motivated by greed, hatred, and delusion, that we ourselves will um, reap the fruits from that, as well as the world around us. And so taking that full responsibility for trying to be as careful as we can with whatever arises, whether it's a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral experience, that we have the same responsibility to be as careful and clear as we can in our actions. And so the traditional format, which of course many of you are familiar with, is this practice of going through a series of different kinds of individuals, starting with a benefactor, someone for whom it's like very easy to feel the sense of caring, um, where it's a very natural relationship of this tender-hearted quality, then going to an easy being. And so you go sort of down this chain of events: easier beings, more neutral beings, more difficult beings, all beings, or many will also start with ourselves as the primary one, or sometimes we bring the self in a little bit later, depending on what works for folks. But it's this idea of sort of going from the easiest to the hardest, from the individual to the group, and stretching, right? And there's a series of phrases, that you'll generally hear some version of. May you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, mm, those kinds of things. And similarly for each practice, the karuna, the mudita, the upekkha. And they're wonderful. It's a wonderful practice. It's a wonderful formation, and it has a lot of power, and has a lot of power to get us very concentrated and in these beautiful mind states. And they don't always work, and they're not the only way. I was thinking today about the first time I tried to practice metta for more of an extended period. It was on a retreat, actually, with Michelle and Stephen many years ago now, where we would do a week of metta and then a week or so, maybe 9 days of vipassana. And I remember just having a really hard time with that. It was just felt very dry. The roteness and the kind of like repeating these phrases, sort of like the pulling the lawnmower chain. It was like trying to get it going, trying to get it going. And I remember I had watched this little video that was very moving to me beforehand, and it had the 23rd Psalm on it. I remember writing a note to Michelle to be like, "Could you give me a copy of this?" Because I didn't know it. I didn't grow up religious. I didn't grow up, uh, you know, in in a religious tradition. I wasn't familiar with this text in the um, Hebrew Bible or the Christian Bible either, right? So it's in there. Obviously, most people know that. And it's when I read it now, I'm like this has so little to do with who I think I am. But boy, when I felt it, there was something about this person's voice when I saw this video, and came to me on this retreat, and I asked for a copy of it, and it ended up being the thing that I just stuck with for these 7 days. I just repeated it over and over again. The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And I can still get there. As much as the framework doesn't resonate intellectually with me, right? There's a belief system in here that is distinct from mine. I totally can feel into that heart space, and the quality of care, of feeling protected, and the peace of heart that is available in that protected space, that sense of faith and assurance and security and love, from that was so powerful to me. And still, it's like I can get there right now. And part of this whole lullaby thing for me was like, I love Christmas carols. I'm like, I was like, there's this, like, the whole, like, the baby in the manger. I am so down with that. Like, again, it's not my tradition, but like I feel that I'm like, just the thought that this child is born and it's the savior, right? That, like, the everyone is going to be saved. That is so beautiful, right? That doesn't matter if I don't believe it. It's like I believe it in my heart. Like, I totally resonate with that emotional longing and the beauty and the inspiration of that, and how good it feels to care about this child, right? How good it feels to feel safe and to feel protected. And so, you definitely don't have to do the psalm, but you also don't have to do the may I be safe, may I be happy, may I be healthy. It's like, you the our we will offer different methods around finding a connection to care, right? And you'll hear already in the instructions we have, and more that we'll offer. But just to know that it's like, you go with what works, go with where it's easy, go with, whatever it might be. Pachamama, you know, um, Elegwe, Oshun Elegwe, like the, Virgin Mary, whatever, the tree outside, the squirrel in the tree. Like, people find often the most, like, our stuffed animals, or, um, there is still a place in Durham, North Carolina. It's called South Point Mall. And when I lived there, outside of Durham, working in a more rural area at this retreat center, this place was like this sanctuary to me. And it was like this dead, had these weird statues of, like, all these little bronze children and, like, these water things. But it was like, I would go and I'd go get a dinner and I'd go to this ice cold movie theater and get a Coke. And it was like, there was just something, like, so reassuring, right, about this experience, that I could, like, that was so predictable, that I could go to this place and, like, and feel relaxed and feel protected and feel good. And so it's like, just to know that it's like, wherever in your mind you might find, right, this place of, like, comfort and safety and security and pleasure, right, like wholesome pleasure in the recollection of it, know that it is good to be able to cultivate a connection to that, good to be able to find your way into the sense of space of protectedness, where you have access to kindness and tenderness, right? This isn't all just about facing the hardest pieces of your life, right? Facing the most painful experiences in your body all day long, facing your deepest fears all day long. It's like, you can't. That the training isn't there. The mind is not yet capable of that, right? And the only way it gets capable is we show up for it when we have the strength and we have the genuine interest and there's mindfulness, and we're like, wow, that is so much pain. And you're genuinely interested. And then you hate it. You hate the pain, but you're genuinely interested in the hate. You know, there's like a true mindfulness and ability to engage. but it will start to drag us down. It will start to wear us down. And rather than get caught up in fighting it and fighting the tiredness of the mind and fighting the inability for the mind to engage in a healthy way, it's like we back off, we rest, go for a walk, we take a nap, and also like we practice loving kindness. Maybe you practice lying down. You don't always force yourself into the position you think you're supposed to be in. You let yourself rest. If you fall asleep, you fall asleep. It's not some like, who cares? We can treat that like a sin. Of course, when we're all together in a hall, we prefer people don't lie down and fall asleep in the hall because it becomes a thing, right? It becomes like distracting. And it's like, you know, but here you're on your own, it's like, oh, you learn to rest. There's beautiful qualities in that. When you're lying down, often the attention will not be quite as clear, as precise, but you might have access to a more gentleness, more softness, not struggling with reality, not trying to fight it, but resting into a little more ease. It is, and what works one day, it might not work the next. There's a value in trying to develop consistency in your loving kindness practice, your compassion practice, your appreciation practice, your equanimity practice. It is good to try a tool for a while because every tool is going to stop working at some point, and you need to go through a desert, go through some hardship with it, go through the places where it's not easy. But other times it's like we also can be flexible in our approaches, in our methods. It's important to explore and to find the support where we can. And also to see where we can get attached. It's like to remember that this is still a balance between love and wisdom, and that the wisdom can get disregarded at times. The power of love out of balance can be very destructive as well. As I was thinking about these lullabies and children, I was just remembering one of the first times I met the child of some good friends of mine, and they were some of the first friends of mine who had kids. And it was quite a while ago, but I remember very clearly, like hanging out and getting to know her a little bit and their new family dynamic a little bit. And at night, reading her a bedtime story. And as I was reading it, just this incredible feeling of just care, of such tenderness, for this little vulnerable being and someone who I was just getting to know. Um, but that was so beautiful and so powerful and felt so pure. And then very quickly, the thought arose of like, if someone tried to hurt her, and like immediately I could just the 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 reality of like the ferocious violence that I was capable of in protecting this child, if something happened, if there was some threat, was just like this wave that hit so quickly out of this place of care and kindness and tenderness. And it was so disturbing to me, right? And it's like, of course, I mean, on one hand, of course. On the other hand, how humbling, how painful to see that this powerful care, if not balanced, can lead to such harm, right? Could lead towards like true violence towards someone else, right? Out of that inability to be able to bear the vulnerability of this being and the protectiveness around it. And to really understand that like this experience is true for every moment, right? It isn't just about a little kid, right? It isn't even just about our own selves. It's actually like when Michelle said and someone asked like, that, obeying the precepts is like, breaking your heart every moment. That's what this is. It's like every moment of experience, we have the capacity to be totally in love with, to have such powerful, all encompassing tenderness toward every sensation in the body, every sensation in the mind, every phenomena outside of ourselves. And yet, the vulnerability of that love, right? The lack of stability of that love, because it's not balanced with wisdom, will lead us to these contractions of heart towards the defensive, the violent, the greedy, the craving, the delusion, right? And that this is ultimately what's at stake in every moment. That it isn't just in these more extreme moments. It's like every moment we have the capacity to care and have like the beautiful, purest caring for whatever is arising, as mundane as it might be, the rising of the breath, the falling of the breath. And yet it's hard to do because of that vulnerability and because our fear around it, our contraction around it, our, the fear and undependability of all phenomena, the vulnerability of reality has us much more entangled. And yet it's possible, right? It is possible to both care and be accepting, right? To understand the uncontrollability of things and to love things just as much, right? That these are actually not exclusive polarities, mutually exclusive polarities. These are things that actually co-generate, co-create, co-refine, co-strengthen one another. And yet it takes this practice of being honest and the contraction and the expansion of the heart, of being willing to have your heart broken each moment with each moment of experience, bearing the pain of the vulnerability, bearing the joy of the beauty and the love, and how hard it is to come back to it as each moment slips away and we find ourselves anew. I found that, as we've had a few stories of people with their loved ones passing away, I found this to be very true when my own father was dying. And certainly because of my practice, I felt I had much more capacity to be totally loving and totally in love and appreciative and joyful about who he was, and clear eyed, accepting of the truth of his passing away, right? That I was going to lose him, that he was going to die. And so much of that ability was not just in the love and the total acceptance, but also in the love and acceptance of the places where I was, of course, resisting, right? Where I was horrified that my father was going to die. I was so sad, obviously, um, for myself, difficult to see someone else in pain and suffering and confusion, right? So it wasn't, I don't mean to say that it's like that we immediately get a kind of perfect grace with all of this hardship, but we get more of it. And then we also get much more of it with our resistance, right? With the pain, with the sadness, with the wishing things were different, not needing those to go away either. And when we can allow that, right? When we can allow things to get hard and for there to be resistance and to understand that this is a long path and the heart really wants to be free, but it also really just wants things to be the way it wants them to be, and to be, tender with that, and how much practice it does take. I remember as before he sort of right in that last week before he sort of really started to kind of I don't know, these stages, can be very kind of clear, but he was still very lucid. But we could tell it's like things are getting a little looser. And I said, I don't, I haven't been through this exactly. I don't remember her having died in the past, but I've done enough meditation that I think things might start to get a little weird for you in the next few days. Like the mind, once it starts to get loose, things can just be very disorienting. And if he wasn't a meditator, it's like you're not used to that, that can be fear inducing. It can be scary. And I just said, it's like if that starts to happen, just try to remember about the people you care about, right? And try to remember that we're all here caring about you. And that ability will it won't change things, right? It won't make things come back together. It's not going to make things feel less strange, but that there will be a more of an ability to be with that comfort, right? To be with the discomfort, the a sense of assuredness and security and being cared for, that we actually are capable of on our own. And I really do feel like that sank in, and that he was able to do that, of course, with our support. And it is a lot of basically lullabies, right, that you're doing around a person who's passing away, whether it's singing or, um, caring for silently. There is this sense of a very similar place in life, right? Or it has its resonance with the experience of birth. And how important that is for all of us, right? That ultimately this is our training for ourselves, that we need to care just as much for ourselves in this way, right? As we age or as we get sick or to as we just are yogis and we're in discomfort or we're sleepier than we want to be. We think we've got this time, and I signed up for this, and I'm trying to put all my energy in, and I'm supposed to show up for this in a way that's different than how I'm feeling right now. And it's like there's a logic to that, of course. And the other side of it is when we die, we'll probably be uncomfortable. When we die, that probably might be a little sleepy. When we're dying, things are not going to be the way we want them to be. Probably. Or there's a good chance. Because even if we just wish we die sooner because it's so painful, we won't. We'll have to go through it. So, these are important practices, right? For all of us in our own approach to it. Of like, oh, right, where can we find some ability to be okay with the difficulty? Oh, be okay with hating the difficulty, being okay with wishing something else was really happening, right? That requires, it's like the clarity to see, oh, there's aversion. Just that. I mean, that'll save that'll save us lifetimes if we just remember that. It's like aversion, like, oh, I don't like this. And it's like, okay, if you get that, then there's like another level you can drop in of like, okay, can I be with that? Can I care for that aversion, for the pain of that? Not as a way to make it go away, not as a way of like, if I can love this to death, like I'm gonna love this and it's gonna go away, right? Or this is gonna feel better because I'm sending love to my lower back or whatever. It's like, of course you're gonna try to do that. All yogis try to do that. And you might even kind of get a little bit of relief from it for a moment, but it's not the way. This is not what the Buddha taught, and it's not going to work ultimately. Ultimately, there is the acceptance of the dukkha and the acceptance of the resistance to the dukkha and caring about the dukkha and caring about the resistance to the dukkha. That, as we've been saying, makes more and more and more of our life acceptable, even the parts that we resist and are unacceptable. It's like this is our ticket. Everything can be folded in to what we care about or to what we see clearly, right? We understand it, we love it, we understand, we love, we feel compassion if it's painful, we feel joy if it's joyful. It's like we have actually, and we are developing these tools to be able to bring everything into this fold, right? Bring everything into our life as a lullaby, right? But not as a lullaby that's putting us to sleep. Mm. These are metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha. They're the lullabies that bring us into awakening. How beautiful that is. How strengthening. How wonderful that is. Mm. Let's just sit for a moment. So wonderful to see you all, and I hope you can join us for our metta lullaby at just about an hour from now.